Welcome back to the Moment of Gamer. Today's mumble is the games that made them, where we look at the games that made the studio, from Checkered Past to Glorious Present to Mysterious Future. Today we're looking at Insomniac Games. Insomniac has had a weird history as a studio. It started off mostly making exclusives for PlayStation, creating some of the most iconic series and characters, and then started making some games for Xbox that PlayStation seems to get very jealous of this. After this, PlayStation decided to buy the studio, making sure they only make exclusives for them, locking them up, and throwing away the key to Marvel. They can now be easily known as one of the best studios behind PlayStation, and has started to make console-buying games, especially if you're a Marvel fan. These new announcements by Insomniac has decided if you're going to be a PlayStation or Xbox person. But Xbox has Indiana Jones fans, right?
My research, I conducted an informal poll, and I've arrived at the rock-solid certainty I've made the right choice.
Well, that's gotta be a good feeling.
Oh, it is. Although...
Oh, crap.
However, it didn't start off that way. If you looked at Insomniac today, you'd be surprised it all started off with a first-person shooter that released in 1996. At the time, the massive boom of first-person shooters was starting to die out, and platforms were starting to take over. Through the game, you follow Jack Curtis. If that isn't a 1996 name for a character, I don't know what is. It feels like the whole game is inspired by the success of Doom 1, released in 1993, with it being set mostly in space areas like the Moon and Mars as you go up against aliens rather than demons. If you can't beat them, why not copy the whole concept and change up the enemies? Jack Curtis also has a brother named Blake Curtis. With that comes the end of Disruptor. A weird start for Insomniac, but after this, we see some very iconic characters a lot of PlayStation fans will all know and love. Spyro, the best little purple dragon ever created in gaming. Actually, he might be the only purple dragon in gaming. The one and only Spyro the Dragon, originally released on the PlayStation 1 in 1988, in the age where 3D platforms were becoming the next big genre. Every studio under the sun was trying to recreate the success of Mario 64 and create the next big mascot. The whole trilogy of Spyro was created within 3 years, with Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, try saying that after 4 pints, releasing in 1999, and then the third game, Year of the Dragon, releasing in the year 2000. After that, Spyro was thrown around to different studios for years, and with the whole series kind of dying in 2008. The Spyro remake of the original trilogy was released 10 years later in 2018. It breathed new life into the Spyro series, making it feel like a next level nostalgia trip. It felt like Spyro was going down the Crash Bandicoot route and releasing a fourth completely new game in the modern day, but Activision. So okay, next we have another iconic series that has gone strength to strength throughout the whole generation of PlayStation, except for that weird PlayStation 4 generation. I don't know what happened there. The original series, and a spin-off of sorts, spans through the whole of the PlayStation 2 generation. Ratchet and Clank is another successful platformer game, but with the 2002 edge, where all games were starting to grow up with the audience. Edginess was the aim of the game. All games started to change it up, and a prime example of this would be Jak and Daxter, but that will be another video for another day.
I'm gonna kill Praxis!
If I could be locked into 1 year of gaming, 2002 would be the year where I would stay. Games like Kingdom Hearts, Bounty Hunter, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sly Cooper, Wind Waker, and BMX XXX all released in 2002. But somehow a game like Ratchet and Clank stood out. This was mostly due to the fact that Ratchet and Clank was a very different game compared to a lot of other games in 2002. It's mostly due to the focus on guns rather than the platforming. The mixture of both came together beautifully throughout the whole series. Also, the story could have had a massive factor in the success. This spans through 3 games and creates the original trilogy. The games released on a yearly schedule from 2002 to 2005, except in 2005 the formula was changed up a bit, where instead of the normal platforming and gunning down enemies, it changed to an arena type game with Ratchet Deadlock, taking out Clank, who helped with the platforming in the original trilogy. Insomniac went back to its roots and tried to jump back onto the first-person shooter boom again 10 years later with Resistance: Fall of Men in 2006. It did feel like the boom of first-person shooters was dying out at this point again, really with the established series like Halo 3 making games in the genre. However, the game was praised for its atmosphere, story and graphics. It was being compared to Call of Duty when Call of Duty was at apex. The story is basically the buggish aliens invade Earth and you fight against them. A much improved go at a first-person shooter genre than in 1996. Ratchet and Clank Future Tools of Destruction. It's been only around 2 years since we have seen the third Ball and Clank. The year is 2007 and it's a weird year for gaming in general, but it's the return of Ratchet and Clank. But this time we're going into a new era, what is dubbed the Future Era. Best name for the era, there isn't anything to do with time travel or time skip or anything along them lines. The only difference is that Ratchet and Clank are established characters in their universe, and now currently we are still technically in this future saga as the story is still kind of, or at least connected in some way to the current games. The first Ratchet and Clank game to appear on the PlayStation 3, nothing much has changed, but the core elements have been perfected. However, there were some growing pains going from the PS2 to the PS3, with technical issues hitting the game. But apart from that, we are still playing a Ratchet and Clank game with some extra bits and pieces. There really isn't enough time between the games to change that much. The biggest thing here is the story, as it starts to focus a lot more towards Ratchet being the last Stormbax and what has happened to his race. We are still seeing aspects of this story till this day in the current generation of games. In 2008 we have Ratchet and Clank Future Quest for Booty. Through the next couple of years of Ratchet and Clank games, there are 2 points where we can see that they're not the core focus. Quest for Booty is one of these. It's not a terrible game. The runtime of the game was around 4 hours and it was kind of a prequel to the next game, but however it feels like the whole game could have been the first part of the next game. It's obvious why this did happen, as the core focus of the year seemed to be Resistance 2, what was released in the same year. This happens again in 2011 in a very similar fashion. Brings us to Resistance 2. We are still in 2008. Cracks are starting to show because of these yearly releases, but somehow Insomniac are still releasing highly reviewed games. Resistance 2 is a very similar game to the first game, but with some different and interesting plot points. The alien race named the Gamorra are now on a full-scale invasion, and you play as a member of the Special Forces group that has been affected with the Gamorra virus. The virus doesn't really change much of what happens as in a gameplay aspect. It has big plot points through the series, as it can turn whoever's infected evil and on the side of the Chimera. It's a good plot point that makes the game full of twists and turns. But why you'd put a whole group of Special Forces team full of this infected what could turn evil at any point is beyond me. Then we got one of the best Ratchet and Clank games in 2009 with Cracking Time. However, there were a lot of fans that missed out on Quest for Booty, so it can be slightly confusing what is happening within the game. The massive focus on the story is fantastic. It does go slightly off the rails here with some time travel, but the focus on Clank is interesting. The gameplay is the best it's ever been, and the amount of different guns makes it a great game. Quest for Booty does let the game down slightly due to lack of build, but the game sets the standard for future games in the series. Insomniac actually do something quite out of character here and actually miss a year with no game in 2010, skipping to 2011. 2011 was a weird year and we saw the death of the Resistance series due to the poor sales. However, the series did manage to tie up a lot of the loose ends with the third game in the series. This marks a very weird time for Insomniac, with the only established series still going was Ratchet and Clank. It felt like after Resistance they had too much time and wanted to work on other things, and were trying to find themselves as a studio. But this started a very dark time for Insomniac Games. In 2011, the focus was obviously the third Resistance game, but we still got a very weird Ratchet and Clank game called All for One. This may be the worst Ratchet and Clank game that was developed by Insomniac Games.
Ratchet and Clank, the heroes who defeated Dr. Nefarious over 2 years ago.
It's time to go back to the way things were, you know? Leave the hero stuff to the other guy.
It steps away from the story-focused gameplay and goes in a co-op direction where you can play as Captain Quirk, Dr. Nefarious, and obviously Ratchet and Clank. If given more time, this game could have been a very decent spin-off, but after playing some of the best Ratchet and Clank games ever made, it feels like a buffer game that should have never been made. So we go into 2012 with Ratchet and Clank Full Frontal Assault. But in some countries like the UK, we got Ratchet and Clank Q-Force, maybe because the innuendos got a bit too full frontal for the UK. Ratchet and Clank are still kind of trying to push for the multiplayer here, but it still just doesn't fit with the game. The series just goes back to its roots, but the game is very short. There's nothing special here, and the story is just okay. Insomniac does kind of go through its low points at this point due to making a deal with EA for the next couple of games. A mobile game published by EA. Okay, this might get rough. This is the start of when Insomniac started to make out the blue games and also games that weren't exclusive to PlayStation. Outernauts was the start of this. Outernauts was basically a Pokemon game and it isn't available anymore. And that is all we will say about that one. It's not a great start to Insomniac's first on PlayStation game, but it's a start of some weird times with the studio, mostly due to them being heavily connected to EA for the next year. We go to the second game published by EA in 2013. Fuse is another failed game from Insomniac, but looking at their track record with the game, it seems to be more due to the involvement with EA. This one isn't anything special at all. It's a very boring co-op game. It kind of feels like a terrible Gear of War clone. The game just felt like a mess, and it's part of the end of the dark times for Insomniac for a while. There's nothing much to say about Fuse. Really, it's one of them games that EA do when they just copy and paste mechanics onto a different game. We're still in 2013 with Ratchet and Clank Insomniac. It's a lot smaller game, but still an amazing one. At this time, it does feel like a lot of Ratchet and Clank games didn't have enough time put into them, due to Insomniac working on too many games at once, or on the massive criticisms of the whole future saga. All had the same complaint of the games being too short. Into Nexus was a fantastic game, but it did feel like the end of the series for a while. Into Nexus could have been the end of the series easily, and there would have been a lot of happy fans. The series had a lot of hiccups at very short games throughout the whole series, but it was still a great one. It kind of felt like Insomniac didn't want to make them, and after this, Insomniac distanced themselves from PlayStation, but PlayStation did not like that. This is where the turning point happens. The next 6 years are going to be a bit weird, full of Xbox exclusives, PC exclusives, and even some mobile games. It feels like Insomniac went through their midlife crisis for 6 years. They had a good start, and then they tried to go backwards and also made some massive mistakes. Here is kind of a quarterly crisis because they do have their good times within these 6 years. This one can't be blamed on EA, however. First, we have one of the best non-PlayStation exclusive games developed by Insomniac. Sunset Overdrive was the first look we got at what the Marvel Universe could look like. It also scared the shit out of PlayStation. The gameplay as a whole was similar how you traverse the latest Spider-Man games. The story is very like the Netflix series iZombie, if you've ever watched that, where the energy drink causes zombie apocalypse. I'm not spoiling anything about this one due to the fact that it's currently on Game Pass and it's really a must play. There's also some rumours of it coming to PlayStation at some point due to the fact that PlayStation now own the IP. Also, if you like Spider-Man 2018 and Ratchet and Clank, this feels like the mix of the two. Okay, we're going to blip through 2015. It's a weird year full of mobile games. First, we have Slow Down Bull, where you play as a cartoon bull and collect things in a top-down fashion. Then we have Fruit Fusion, just a game where you fuse fruit together in a circle. Not sure how to explain that one. Then they have Bad Dinos, a tower defense game where you fight dinos. Were they struggling for money at this point? For God's sake, the studio made Ratchet and Clank. That marks the whole of 2005 and a very, very weird year for Insomniac. Then we get the 2006 Ratchet and Clank, what did have some really good gameplay, but the story felt really mismatched the whole series due to it being basically a retelling of the new film, kind of a weird reboot. After playing the original trilogy, it just felt really out of place. Then we have Song of the Deep, that felt like a very good indie game, not a bad move for the studio. Song of the Deep was a great little Metroidvania game that was set underwater. Nothing groundbreaking, nothing special, but Insomniac Games were definitely working on something bigger, what we will get to. Then we have a lot of smaller VR games, what we will go through quickly. First, we have Edge of Nowhere, a HP Lovecraft game inspired story. It kind of basically the same as any other HP Lovecraft first person game, where everything starts off normal, then slowly decays into something weird. This one is set within an icy cold place as well, so it does have something going for it. Then we have the Unspoken VR game, set in a world full of magic. Looking around, there isn't really much information out there on this one. Looking at the graphics though, the game looks mind-blowing with a lot of original magical abilities throughout. They really did make one of each genre on the VR in this year. Feral Rights is another VR game, but it's also kind of a hack and slash game. Looking through the gameplay, there weren't really many VR elements. Now that marks the end of 2006, and Insomniac made a lot of games in this year, but they did have 2017 off to perfect a certain Marvel game. We had some bad times and we had some good times up to 2018, but now it's time for the Marvel times. Kind of, we still have 4 games after this, but basically Marvel times. I just ruined the joke. Anyway, Spider-Man.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Spider-Man 2018 hit a different level. It's one of the best Spider-Man games ever made. It's no Spider-Man Web of Shadows, don't get me wrong, but Spider-Man 2018 gets nearly everything right, from the comic book feel to the amount of suits to the story. It's just perfect Spider-Man. Everything from the web swinging to the combat. The only thing I would say is that the mini games are pointless and terrible and take away a lot from the gameplay. Really hope they don't include that in future Spider-Man games. From now to 2019 we have 3 different VR games, so it's time for another list. First we have Ceiling. It isn't really much, basically a VR game where you play it with a bonsai tree. Pretty simple. Personally I'd rather the bonsai tree. Then we have Stormland. Through Stormland you play as a kind of robot exploring through the world fighting other robots. It's a very interesting game. Then lastly we have Strangely, it's basically the same as Ceiling but with alien monsters. Finally, this marks the current end to the VR era of Insomniac Games. And with that comes the possible golden era for Insomniac Games. Is anyone getting these comic jokes?
I understood that reference.
Now we go into the more recent games with Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. It was very surprising when this game was announced and sadly did feel like it should have been part of the original Spider-Man or left a couple of years to build upon to make a bigger game. But looking through Insomniac's past, it's not that surprising. They're known for these smaller games for the years. The timing of this was amazing as well, as it released near Christmas and the whole game had a Christmas feel, kind of like Die Hard.
Here comes Santa Claus!
After this we go into the current year of 2021. Then we got one of the latest games. I'm not speaking about this one much because of spoilers, because it released so close to this time, but it feels like this is the future in Ratchet and Clank. It surprised me we met another Lombax and a kind of another Clank. This is one of the best PS5 exclusive games you can currently buy. The graphics are on point and the levels load within levels, which is kind of crazy. There's also a lot going for this game, and if you own a PS5 this game needs to be in your collection. That's the latest game, but there are 2 games announced already for Sonic, most likely releasing in the next 5 years. With Marvel Spider-Man 2 set to release in 2023, it will also introduce Venom into the Spider game universe, and hopefully Kraven the Hunter, some of the most iconic characters in Spider-Man. It's also possibly that we might be able to play as Venom in this game, but that's also speculation. Then it looks like we may see Marvel's Wolverine released in 2025, also a speculation by me. This being a very interesting game that has a small teaser with a bunch of references including Wolverine versus Hulk. After experiencing both Spider-Man games, the next generation of Insomniac Marvel games are shaping up to be great ones. That's it for all the games that made Insomniac. Thanks for watching, make sure to subscribe and like for more mumbles.